Something changed in the Browns offseason, and it's not the kind of change you see on the surface. This isn't about a single candidate getting eliminated or a name suddenly becoming popular. This is about the direction of the franchise tightening into a specific shape, because when the coaching list shrinks, it doesn't just narrow options, it signals what the organization believes it can win with. And right now, the Browns look like they're leaning toward a coach who can be brilliant offensively, but also needs the roster to be built a certain way. That's where the real tension is. If they go young and offensive, the draft suddenly becomes less about best player available and more about fitting a plan that may not match the team's current strengths, and if they don't adjust the roster accordingly, the early season could feel like a slow unraveling, not because the coach is bad, but because the structure underneath him isn't ready. So here's the question that matters more than any quarterback name right now. Which draft choice will the Browns be forced into because of the coach they pick? And what will that decision reveal about what they really think this team is?
I say no, and the reason why is because I don't think adding a quarterback before you address the offensive line and you address the skill guys. At this point in time, I don't know how much better Penix is. I know he's really good from the pocket, and he can really spin it. The kid can really spin it, especially in that 15 to 25-yard range. I always loved him at Washington when he did that. In fact, I loved him back at Indiana when he did that. But their offensive line and their receiving core, I don't know what else you're going to get out of a quarterback if you don't invest in those two positions. The idea of pass protection and run game and the ability to run after catch when you throw it to a guy, those things are so lacking right now. I just don't know if quarterback is the right way to go. I think you got to start on the inside out. Go with the quarterbacks you got and see what you can do in the draft with some of these linemen and some of these receivers. And for me, it's a really good draft in receivers, especially guys that can get easy yards.
Asterisk, the moment we're in now is not just another coaching search. What feels different is that the Browns are no longer shopping for a coach who fits their roster. They're now searching for a coach who can make the roster fit his vision. That's a subtle shift, but it's huge. When a team is confident in its identity, the coaching search is about alignment, finding someone who matches what the roster already is. When a team is uncertain, the search becomes a form of direction setting. It's the organization admitting, we don't know exactly who we are yet, but we think we can build it. And that's why this week matters. Because the list of candidates that survived the second round is not just smaller, it's more specific. The Browns are moving toward a certain kind of coach, younger, offensively creative, and more dependent on a clean structure than a veteran who can manage chaos. That implies a belief that the roster can be reshaped quickly enough to match that coach. But here's the catch. Reshaping a roster isn't just about adding talent. It's about changing the shape of the team. It means prioritizing positions that support a system, not just positions that fill holes. And that's where the draft becomes the real battleground. Because if the Browns pick a coach who needs a certain type of offensive identity, the draft stops being a general talent hunt and becomes a plan execution tool. Suddenly, the first round isn't just about best player available. It becomes about what the coach needs to survive the first 8 to 10 weeks. And that's a very different kind of pressure. You can already see the pattern forming in the conversation around the team. The talk is shifting from who can we hire to what do we have to build? And that changes the real story. The Browns have always been a team that has leaned on defense to create margin. But this offseason, the discussion is quietly moving toward offense, not because the offense is suddenly the answer, but because the front office is realizing the defense alone can't carry the team anymore. They need an identity. And the coaching decision is the first public step in choosing one. The more interesting part is the underlying assumption behind the coaching conversation, that the Browns' current roster is not a finished product, that the team needs to be remade, and that remaking it might require sacrificing short-term stability for a long-term structure. That's the real tension. Because if the Browns are willing to remold the roster, they're also admitting the last few seasons weren't just almost there. They were a different kind of team than the one they're trying to become. And that means the next few months aren't just about picking a coach. They're about deciding whether the Browns are going to rebuild quietly or reshape loudly. The draft becomes the first test of that decision. Because if the Browns pick the wrong position early or the wrong type of player, the new coach won't just struggle. He'll be forced into a plan he didn't choose. And that's where you start to see the consequences of this shift. The question isn't whether the Browns will pick a quarterback. The question is whether they will pick a system. And that's why this moment matters more than it looks. Because the Browns are no longer just deciding who will coach the team. They're deciding what the team will be built to become. If Chapter 1 is about the shift in direction, Chapter 2 is about the shift in power. Because once a team commits to a coach with a strong offensive identity, the decision doesn't stay in the coach's office. It spreads through the building. It changes who controls the roster and who gets to define what success looks like right now. The Browns are operating under a simple tension. They have a roster that was built to win in a certain way. But the league has changed and the roster is not adapting fast enough. So the organization is forced to ask a difficult question: who gets to decide the speed of change? That's the real leadership dynamic behind this coaching search. Not the coach's X's and O's, but who has the authority to reshape the roster, and how much patience the front office has to give the coach to do it when a team hires a veteran coach. The message is, we trust the system we already have, and we need someone to manage it better. When a team hires a younger coach, the message is, we think the system we have is not the system we need, and we're willing to rebuild around a new one. That's a different kind of pressure. It's not just on the coach, it's on the entire front office. Because the coach becomes a lens through which every draft pick, free agent, and roster decision is judged, and that's where trust becomes the real currency. Because if the coach is young and offensive-minded, he will likely demand control over the pieces that support his vision. He will want to shape the quarterback room, the offensive line, the receiving group, the parts that determine whether his system can actually function, but the Browns already have a quarterback situation that is inherently unstable. And the more a coach wants to shape the offense, the more he will feel the pressure to either fix the quarterback position or prove that the current group can still work. That's why the conversation about trading Dillon Gabriel matters, even if it seems like a minor detail. A backup quarterback isn't just a backup. He's a signal about what the organization believes about development, continuity, and who gets protected if the starter struggles. If the Browns trade Gabriel, it's a statement. It means they're either confident in their future quarterback plan, or they're willing to accept the risk of being unprotected in the short term. And that tells you what the power structure is likely to look like: a coach who demands a specific quarterback profile, or a front office that wants to keep control of the position, and the quarterback conversation is only one piece. The bigger power shift is how the draft will be used as a tool to enforce the coach's vision. Because when you hire a coach who needs a specific offensive identity, the draft becomes less about best player and more about what fits. That creates internal pressure on the scouting department and on the front office to prioritize certain traits that may not be the easiest to justify in public. That's the kind of internal tension that doesn't show up in headlines. It shows up in the way teams talk about players. It shows up in how they justify draft picks. It shows up in the subtle shifts of language that indicate who is being listened to. And that's why this moment feels like a turning point. Because if the Browns hire a coach who demands a new offensive identity, they will be forced to choose what kind of team they want to become. And that choice will reveal the true power structure in Cleveland. Will the front office stay in control and force the coach to adapt? Or will the coach get the roster he wants, even if it means the team looks different for a year or two? The answer will determine whether the Browns are building a team or building a plan. And that's the tension the organization is weighing right now. Not in public, but in every internal meeting, every draft board, and every conversation about what the next season is supposed to be. So here's the real point that matters going forward. The Browns aren't just hiring a coach. They're choosing who gets to define the next version of the team. If they go with a young offensive mind, the roster will have to change quickly, and not just in the way fans want, but in the way the coach needs. That creates a pressure the organization hasn't fully had to manage before. And if the roster doesn't shift fast enough, the coach doesn't fail because of his playbook. He fails because the building didn't give him the tools to execute it. That's why the draft is now the real test. Because the first pick isn't just talent. It's a vote on the direction of the franchise. So the question we're left with isn't who will be the coach. It's this: which draft decision will reveal what the Browns truly believe about their future and how quickly they're willing to pay the cost to prove it. And the answer to that will shape the next season long before the first snap.